ES Audio.
Hello, I'm Nick Curtis, the Evening Standard's chief theatre critic. Welcome back to our theatre podcast. This week I'm joined by Nancy Durrant, the Evening Standard's culture editor, and Nick Clark, the deputy culture editor. Coming up shortly, we're getting festive, or are we, with Elf the musical at the Dominion Theatre. But first up this week, it's ... Vardy Vs Rooney, the Wagatha Christie trial.
Would you not agree, Mrs. Vardy, that if it looks like a leak and it sounds like a leak, and you even use the word leak, then it's more likely than not to be a leak?
No.
And that's what you were, a leak.
No.
This is a piece of verbatim theatre where most of the lines spoken on stage are culled from the libel trial that Rebekah Vardy, footballer's wife, brought against Coleen Rooney, another footballer's wife, claiming she had defamed her when Vardy had been leaking material from her private Instagram account to the Sun newspaper.
What I wanted was to stop the person who was leaking my private information to the Sun. This was my last resort.
Obviously, you knew it was going to cause a massive impact across millions of people, correct?
No, I was surprised myself how much interest it caused.
Well...
Normally, this sort of form of theatre is used for extremely serious court transcripts, such as those from the Nuremberg trials, those from the Grenfell Tower inquiry. This is a completely new way of approaching it, I think. Nick, the nice dichotomy of this play is that it's a very dry legal procedure about very, very funny text messages, quite often with emojis described in court, or famously, as with Rooney's reveal, it's ... Rebekah Vardy's account. And these dots are read out several times on the course of the stage, every single one itemised, and it's fairly hilarious.
Including the prologue.
And you get two sort of football pundits who are commentating on the action. Each time one of the QCs, or KCs as I suppose they now are, gets to the front, gets to their feet, you hear the sound of a sort of football boot on leather and a whistle blowing. So it's sort of half trial, half football match. I think you and I were saying earlier they should really have kept it at 90 minutes because it is end-to-end stuff, isn't it?
Yes, and they should have maybe expanded the theme to maybe throwing over to the studio where experts could have explained a bit more. Instead, what's really interesting with the framing device of the two pundits, they really lean into the football cliches and it works well. I've read in some places they think it breaks up the flow of the play. I actually quite enjoyed it because I think otherwise the play would remain a little bit too flat if you just stay with the trial as it is, the trial transcript. So it adds a necessary injection of humour to it, but I think they could have lent into it even more.
Did you find was it sympathetic to the two women, do you think, or do you think were they held up as figures of fun?
I actually think it was sympathetic to both of them. They're both brilliantly paid. Lucy May Barker as Rebekah Vardy and Laura dos Santos as Coleen Rooney. I don't think they do hold them up as figures of fun. Having their voices there does lend, actually, surprisingly, dignity to them. Certainly Coleen.
I've never been in a court. I've never been in a legal case before. This is the first time publicly I have ever spoke about this.
Certainly the people around me took real delight in the laughs, in the skewering, and the moments of absurdity. They'd sort of come to witness two caricatures, I think. And yeah, around me, I did feel a little bit uncomfortable and wondered, because this is not just a play about an argument over social media. It extends into society, into social media. It's also about class.
Yes.
And there's something uncomfortable about a woman with a Scouse accent when she first opens her mouth in the prologue, and laughter ringing around the audience, even though she's not really said anything funny.
You're right, and I think that the writer and the director quite skillfully addressed that towards the end. I think there's a moment which is set up as a laugh, and then the laugh is killed quite impressively and strikingly in the audience's throat. I should say, I think there's also a great performance from Lucy May Barker as Rebekah Vardy, who has this sort of, to begin with, just this incredibly dry, downbeat voice and sort of dead-eyed stare, as if she doesn't realise she's condemning herself out of her own mouth with every single thing she says. And there are some wonderful things, such as, saying to the interrogating barrister, well, if I'm being honest, he of course points out, well, you better be, because you're in a witness box of a courtroom.
And that's why Ms. Watt couldn't face coming to court in the end, to have been found that she'd lied, could she?
Actually, I think she's been driven to suicidal thoughts by these proceedings and by the antics of the defendant.
She even withdrew her statement, just being being read out.
And
So
yes,
we've
responding
seen
to the question of, why is your publicist's phone in Davy Jones's locker going, who's Davy Jones? And
Yes.
having the judge explain it to her. But yeah, she's got the better part in that she has the laughs.
Yes.
Coleen is much more sort of dignified. And
She gets the sympathy, I think,
Yes.
rather than the laughs, definitely. Although Vardy does get to sort of walk off stage in quite a sort of imperious
Yes.
fashion at the end of it. So she gets one last sort of moment of panache in there, I suppose.
She does. I do wish that there was more time to go into some of the issues that do underlie it, because they're hinted at, and it felt to me like they weren't brought out, perhaps on purpose, but it felt like there was more to run. And the film that I came out thinking of was Amy, the documentary by Asif Kapadia. And the reason was when watching that film, it's very clear that you as the audience member, you as someone around at that time, are implicated in what's happened to Amy Winehouse, in the media abuse, her downfall, in just the hounding of this woman. And it seems very clear to me that we're equally as implicated in this trial as well, in a way, in the social media outrage, the outpourings, the laughs, the memes, all of that. And maybe it's because we're too close to it that people haven't thought about it in those terms. But I left the theatre thinking, we're totally implicated. I don't think many around me thought that. They were just having a laugh.
Possibly not. Maybe you're right. And certainly I think we were there on different nights. I mean, the first night audience, I think one always expects that sort of abandon from, but interesting that the night you saw it on, you had the same sort of feeling. And the big question that hovers over the play that is never quite explained is why on earth did she bring the case? But the other people, who, as I think you were suggesting, who are implicated are not just us journalists, but us the punters, us who are dwelling, salivating over this case and over the funny things that were in on Instagram or the way these people seem to be carving up each other's lives for profit, really.
So it plays every Tuesday until the 10th of January. I wonder whether it will carry on in that format or actually find a theatre to call home on a more regular basis.
I agree. It's one of those things that sort of seems tailor-made for the small studio theatre that everyone says they need in the West End. It's on at the same theatre as Life of Pi. It performs the night that Life of Pi doesn't perform, which is Tuesdays. This could be quite a useful way of theatres utilising dead nights. It sits very, very lightly on the set, but it occupies the space quite well. I think it uses the theatre. It's not like sticking a stand-up comedian just on the set of The Crucible and expecting them to be funny. So, maybe it will transfer somewhere. And of course, we have the prospect of a rematch if Rebekah Vardy decides to appeal the decision. And I believe Lisa Spirling and Liv Hennessy have already said they've got their pens sharpened.
There was a football pitch laid on top of the Life of Pi set.
Yeah. So sort of half football pitch, half courtroom, isn't it? Yes. Much like my own home setup. So, Vardy v Rooney, the Wagatha Christie trial at Wyndham's Theatre. I gave this 4 stars out of 5. What did you reckon, Nick?
I gave it ... 4 stars too.
Right, let's go to the adverts. In the second half, Nancy joins me to discuss a festive offering at the Dominion. That's ELF, but will it be an ELF benefit or an ELF warning? We'll be back after this. So, ELF the musical. This is the return of ELF the musical to the Dominion, where famously, back in 2015, it first appeared and briefly held the record for the most expensive theatre tickets in the West End at $240 a pop. Now it's back. It's an adaptation of the Will Ferrell film, which I think has established itself very much as a Yuletide favourite, directed by Jon Favreau, produced by Judd Apatow. It has an amazing cast in it. This is the stage version. What did you think, Nancy?
Well, I mean, it's not for me. So the one thing I would say is I suggest to anyone listening not to go and see it with a hangover, because that turned out to be a bit of a struggle, I'm not going to lie. But, It's not Sondheim. It's a treat for children. Although, as you said, I think it's a bloody expensive treat for children. There was a family sitting in the row in front of me with 4 adults and I think 4 or 5 kids. And the idea of just how much money they must have spent, not including the endless supply of kind of lurid sweets and bottles of Prosecco. Yes. It was so interesting on a Saturday matinee because loads and loads of kids who were absolutely loving it, even like really quite little ones. And there were some moments where they were genuinely like awestruck by, I think, the stagecraft. There's a moment with snow, which is absolutely brilliant, even though it made me put my hood up straight away because I didn't want it to ruin my hair. But it's, the children were absolutely adoring it. And actually, there were like groups of middle-aged women with elf hats and bottles of booze and having a great time, kind of come in to town for the day and it's not really like going to see a play. It's an
event,
experience,
isn't it?
It's an event.
It's an event, it's a Christmas party type thing, I suppose.
Exactly.
Yes.
There's a lot of kind of clapping along and, all that kind of stuff. And it's a very high sugar experience.
It is. It should be said, and that is something, that's where it differs from the film, which has quite a lot of sort of bitterness woven through it.
Merry Christmas, everybody!
Buddy is a human who has been accidentally raised as an elf in Santa's grotto in the North Pole, and he is, of course, twice the height of everybody else, but he believes himself to be an elf. He does all the things that elves do, so he has an extremely high sugar diet. He loves Christmas. He loves Santa. He is relentlessly enthusiastic. And suddenly he's told, actually, your dad is this grumpy publisher of children's books in New York, and he gets dumped onto the mean streets of New York.
It's possibly the least likely publisher of children's books in the world, although perhaps that's what happens. I don't know.
The beauty of the film is that his dad is played by James Caan, who is fantastic in it. And Buddy's elf dad is played by Bob Newhart, possibly the least Christmas joy-fulfilled person you've ever seen in your life. And there's really not that much of that here.
No, it does have a kind of thick layer of very, very sugary icing over the whole thing. Let's talk about it in terms of performances and songs and so forth. Like
yes.
The singing is pretty good, I think.
Yes, the singing is pretty good. The dancing is individually not bad, I think, although I found the group numbers a little bit sloppy.
Yeah,
I think Strictly Come Dancing has made us all appreciate our arm formulations and things more than we used to now. I think we're all much more hypercritical of technical skill in dancing.
Yeah, absolutely. But there was a huge audience appreciation of some of the bigger numbers. Whenever anyone did a bit of a belt, they absolutely loved it. There was lots of bravo and serious clapping. And in terms of performances, I mean, Simon Lipkin is Buddy. He's playing the leading role. He's a very accomplished musical theatre and theatre actor, and I think he is fine. I think he's sort of, there isn't so much you can do with this role because he's a child in an adult's body.
He is a child man,
weird.
And therefore, particularly the romance he has with his fellow department store worker has to be handled very, very carefully.
Yeah.
Again, it's something that I think Will Ferrell carries off with almost unique aplomb in the film, and it's almost unfair to Simon Lipkin to expect him to, come anywhere close to that. Really,
exactly, and you do have to, when you're doing this kind of musical theatre, when there's so much sort of glitter and pizzazz and sugar and sweetness, it's actually very, very difficult to tread that line, I think. It's quite hard to believe that the girl, Jovi, who we meet the first time, but then actually doesn't have that many lines, it would fall for this sort of slightly ridiculous
this
person.
syrup-glugging man dressed in an elf suit.
Well, quite. My favourite characters coming out of it were Michael and Emily, who are the son of his publisher father, the younger son, who's about 12, who's meant to be about 12 years old, and the dad's wife. And they were actually rather lovely. I mean, you'll see a different Michael, whichever night you go, because there are several boys playing that role. And with children of that age, you do tend to get quite a lot of sort of standing and belting, but they were really lovely. And for me, I liked the characters because they were both optimistic but realistic, unlike Buddy, who is just relentlessly optimistic and doesn't really understand what realism is, and that's fine. They're dealing with an unhappy, overworked father and husband, and their chemistry together, which I think is undoubtedly absolutely on the shoulders of Rebekah Locke as Emily, was actually very touching. She's the only, she's the grown-up, but they really worked well together, and they have this lovely number when I don't think I'm giving it away, they see Santa. And
Spoiler alert.
Spoiler alert! And they really, their sort of excitement and coming together is really quite adorable, actually, and I rather enjoyed that bit.
The standout songs I thought were Happy All the Time. I quite like which is a big bouncy elfy number, and the story of Buddy towards the end, where they all tell you basically the story of Buddy.
It's the story of Buddy the elf. It's the story of Buddy the elf. It's the story of. It's kind of brilliant if he says so himself. It's the story of Buddy the elf.
But I quite liked Nobody Cares About Santa, sung by a rabble of disgruntled department store St. Nick's in a big Chinese restaurant.
Nobody cares about Santa. You once were revered. Now they yank off your beard. 'Cause nobody cares about Santa Claus.
The only thing about that number that slightly disturbed me was there are 3 young female actors, dancers, singers as part of the ensemble at that point, playing the waitresses, and the dresses that they're wearing these very short Cheongsam dresses, and they're slit essentially up to the waist.
Yeah.
And they're wearing, what are they called? Fishnet tights. But they're doing a lot of leaping and I just sort of thought, is it entirely necessary that they would dress like they were in a kind of opium den? I don't know. I wasn't entirely up for that.
It should be said that Georgina Castle as Jovi as well is sort of given a miniskirt rather than a personality, I think.
Yeah, I did feel a little bit like the whole thing was all about Buddy and his sort of syrup habit. I mean, what am I going to do? I'm sitting here talking about Elf the musical, which is effectively a panto, worrying about the kind of position of women in it and whether or not their characters are sufficiently rounded. I'm looking at this from the wrong angle. I should have been looking at it from the bottom of one of those bottles of Prosecco that they are making a killing on the bar in the Dominion, because so many people have gone to watch it, including people who have apparently been watching the Asda advert. I don't know if you've seen it, but Asda is they've included bits from the film in the Christmas advert, and apparently it's made bookings rocket, which is kind of amazing.
It's testament to the power of that character, isn't it? And to the original film. It's my wife's favourite Christmas film, and we do rewatch it every year. And that's one thing that this show did make me want to do, was go back and rewatch it.
Well, exactly. I think that's fine, and I never need to see it again.
Yes,
that's absolutely fine. But it was very, very clear to me that everybody in the audience was having a great time, and that is ultimately what matters.
So, being a Christmas Grinch, I gave Elf 2 stars out of a possible 5. I know you're sort of erring slightly more on the generous by the sound of it, Nancy. What did you think?
I am erring more on the generous, and though I hate a 3-star review, as you know, Nick, it's I feel it's a bit sitting on the fence. I'm prepared to kind of sit on the fence with this one. I think it is kind of it's a 3-star show. But if you want something to take your kids to and have a very, very Christmassy day or night out, then it's the show for you. 4 stars if it pacifies the kids and if you tuck into the booze
5,
beforehand.
Yeah. Great. Well, that was Elf the Musical at the Dominion Theatre. I'm Nick Curtis.
I'm Nick Clark.
And I'm Nancy Durrant.
And you've been listening to the Evening Standards Theatre podcast. Tune in again next week.